Council for Seniors, what we do is we're an arm of the City of Ventura. And like I said, we meet every month. We do these educational forums 3 to 4 times a year, depending on need and depending on what subject matter. This particular forum today was suggested by our general membership, who wanted to know why can't they, if they get newspaper, printed press, not online. A lot of our seniors are still on printed media. So why don't we have anybody that really represents the City of Ventura? That was a big question. There's the Acorn in Camarillo, and Thousand Oaks has their own, and other small communities. We have the Breeze, we have the Reporter, which is also that goes the county, but what's happening? How come we don't get press? What's going on? And I hope some of you will ask questions like that. I want you to be very pointed in your questions. No softballs. We don't do softball pitching in the Ventura Council for Seniors. We are all of a certain age, and we pretty much have lost our filters. So with that being said, again, welcome. I'm grateful to the City of Ventura for allowing us to have our meetings. Please do come back again. And today I'm grateful to also the Downtown Ventura County, Ventura Downtown Rotary, which is providing lunch for all of you directly after this in the back of the building here. So if you need a card and you need to know who I am, I'm available. I'm upstairs. I run the Encore programs, which is free computer training for 50 and older, free. So if you need to be more computer proficient, you want to learn how to use any of the computer applications with Office 10, you'll sign up for our classes. We are conveniently at two different locations, the county and also the city. If you have a cell phone, please turn it off. Yes. I think I just heard one. Yeah. Please turn it off. Also, this is being videotaped. This will be played later on CAPS TV. And if you have an issue with that and you don't want to be on camera, please let us know. We'll edit you out. So I want to thank our panelists today that responded favorably, and also our moderator, which is Tim Gallagher, retired editor of the Ventura County Star. Yay, Timmy! Next man. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn this all over to Tim. The panelists will have an opportunity to introduce themselves to you, and then we will have questions that you, if you put it on a piece of paper, we'll pick them out of the bowl. We don't have to identify you, but if you have a question after they are done, please hold up your hand, and if you want to direct it to somebody specifically on panel, you'll have the opportunity to do that too. So again, thank you all for attending. I'm appreciative of all my board members that are here, and particularly Lori Arasta, which is here, who's our secretary and does everything. So I'm really grateful to have Lori as with us as well. We'll probably have some city council people drift in later too. You can ask them questions. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Thank you, Suze.
Thank you.
You know, when you said that remark about no filters, you lost your filter a long time ago. I have never, ever known you to have a filter.
You can ask the husband. I've never had a filter.
There are 2 people in the world that you never say no to. I went to 12 years of Catholic school, so I never say no to nuns. And I never say no to Suze Montgomery. So they're in a great category, Catholic school kid. Well, thank you all for being here today. This ought to be a lot of fun. I love doing these moderating panels because I learn a lot. Hear a lot from the panelists that were up here, from your questions, that sort of thing. So we ought to have a good time today. And I am never shy about cutting off an answer if it's going on too long, or cutting off a question if that's going on too long too. So we just want to keep this thing moving and keep it lively, okay? So the typical thing in these moderator panels is to ask one question and you go down the line and everybody gives their answer, and 10 minutes later you're all asleep, right? We're not doing that, okay? All right. Darren Peshka. By the way, we have 4 panelists today. They all have names that could be men's names, but clearly 2 of them are not. How about that? Darren Peshka, who was the smartest guy who hired you when you came here?
That's a really tough question.
See, I told you I asked tough questions. Darren is the new, and is the title editor or?
News director.
News director of the Ventura County Star. So How's that different from what an editor does?
It's really not much different. It's just a different title.
Okay.
I'm overseeing the newsroom of the Ventura County Star.
Okay. Kansas Jayhawk?
Kansas Jayhawk, Rock Chalk.
Very good,
Yeah.
very good. John, how are you?
I'm just right.
Good. That's a very good answer. How often do you publish, and what do you put in there?
Currently, you mean?
Yes, sir.
Well, currently in my
This is not a history test, okay? Currently.
No,
Every
no,
answer's
don't worry
are
about
current.
that. No, I've been a journalist all my life, but right now in semi-retirement, I am writing and editing the Sierra Club's newspaper for the Santa Barbara Ventura region, and it's all outdoor and environmental news.
Very good, John. Thank you. Now, Richard, you're subbing.
That's correct.
What's the
I am
story with
subbing.
Sheldon?
Sheldon Brown, our publisher, fell down with an illness last night, and I was, so please excuse me, I'm ill prepared. I mean, I found out about this last night, and I'm going to do my best to cover for him and answer the questions as best that I can.
You'll do fine.
Okay.
You'll do fine. Michael, how are you?
I'm good.
You sure? You look nervous up here. Why are you nervous? Because you're closest to me?
Well, maybe a little.
That's it. I make it all the time.
Just to clarify, it is Michael, and I was born a female, and this is my name for the last 36 years. So I can tell you a little bit about the
Yeah.
paper. I've been at the VC Reporter for about 9 years now. We cover the entire county. We span from news, feature, articles, which, excuse me.
See, that's why you were nervous. You weren't close enough
Close
to the mic.
enough to the mic. We do feature articles covering an array of subjects that could be national subjects all the way down to very local-oriented, subjects as well. And we cover art, music, media, and food as well. So, and everything's Ventura County centric, and we are very much dependent on you, our readers, to let us know what is concerning you.
Very good. Thank you. Let's go right at it. Darren, you published any fake news lately? What is that all about? And how do you in a daily newspaper overcome that when you've got the President of the United States claim that all journalists are dishonest?
Well, to my knowledge, we haven't published any fake news
Okay, there's one for
lately.
you.
So that if we have, it hasn't been brought to my attention. I think that's certainly a challenge for all media organizations when there is a message out there that mainstream media, I think the focus has been more on mainstream media, is presenting fake news. I think we have an advantage that we're at the local level, and the community knows us, and we have a long history here, and we're very accessible to people in the community. So I think we're known as a trustworthy organization, and we don't really have as much of a challenge as fighting that fake news accusation.
As the Washington Post does, for instance.
Right.
Michael, is there a left bias in the news industry? A bunch of lefties, liberals.
Well, it's a weird thing to say we're lefties, because I think generally journalists become pretty sensitive when they see what's happening in the world and they see the suffering. And if inherently that makes you compassionate and therefore that makes you a liberal, liberals tend to ask questions to address suffering and problems we see in the world. And we don't automatically assume more of a individual accountability. We see more things as how we can help and further each other in this community and in our society. So is there a left bias? I don't know, but I am compassionate and I do care about other people. And often I've seen, been a bleeding heart for things that are really important in my purview and understanding. And to eliminate a bias in human nature is just absurd. You can do your best to be neutral, but you're always going to ask questions that generally concern that reporter or that editor. So,
Who said it? The job of journalists is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. Is that Mencken?
that's right.
Mencken? Okay, very good. John, Sierra Club, you got to be way out there on the left. You don't care about business. It's just all about fish and birds and everything, right?
No, not true. As a matter of fact, yes, the Condor Call and Sierra Club newsletters are very activist these days. The Sierra Club made a very controversial decision in the year, it was the same year that Geraldine Ferrara was running for vice president, that they would become an advocacy group. We have about 3 million members. And this is very controversial even to this day, because prior to that, the Sierra Club was very much mixed. It was totally nonpartisan. It was the love of the outdoors, expand parks and national wildlands, save everything. But like wildlife and endangered species, now it's much more of an advocacy thing. But now, when you say left, I don't consider clean air or clean water left.
There are people who do, though.
Well, they breathe the same air. And, for instance, the people who want to cut the EPA, I say, do you have children? Do you have grandchildren? Do you know what you're doing to them? I mean, it's just outrageous. But you were asking, I'll cut this off real quick, though. But nevertheless, despite the fact that we're an advocacy group for the environment, I check my facts. When the Sierra Club and Sierra Club California, Sierra Club California, by the way, is a unique organization in that it's also a lobbyist in Sacramento. But when they send me something like this issue and everything, I check it with PolitiFact or whatever, because I don't want something that's too skewed in the newsletter.
Makes sense. I want to come back to that in a little bit, because I think we had a circle around on that checking of facts and that sort of thing. But Paul, I'll give you a chance. What's the favorite story you've written about Ventura so far during your time at the Breeze?
I think one of my favorite stories is not a happy story. It was a story about 2 policewomen who were involved in a shooting and were run over in I think it was the Motel 6. Mm-hmm. And I found it to be very interesting and of value to our readers.
Yeah, okay, very good. What difficulties did you encounter reporting that story?
Difficulties getting into the site.
Okay.
Difficulties, with information and particularly the welfare of the officers that were involved, and following up on what happened to them afterwards.
Okay. Not always the easiest job in the world for a reporter, is it? People are critical of you, but they don't realize how difficult it can be sometimes to gather all the facts.
Yes, indeed, and the times that we have to do it.
Carl Bernstein once said that journalism is not about the truth, it's about the best available version of the truth by deadline.
Yes.
And that sounds funny, but that's accurate, isn't it? I mean, Michael, somebody presents a story to you and you have X number of days to go out and find out whether they're right or wrong. And
Right. The worst, I can't think of something that we've had to switch right at the at deadline it's on the press and now we have to fix it. But that has occurred, and there have been, thinking about your question about fake news.
yeah.
And so I did an editorial. I write the editorials for the VC Reporter. So if you hate that opinion, you can always skip it and go to the news. And I don't have any problem with that. But we did write about the ICE raids that were happening here. And there was some major alarm that was...
Tell them what ICE is, I'm sure that's...
ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and that is for illegal or undocumented immigrants. And so there's a lot of fear that it occurred, that they were sweeping in and arresting many people here, except there was only 6 people who were arrested during a regular routine raid that had happened in January. And so anyway, I posted that editorial online. The same day that I posted that, the AP released that they had acquired the 11-page document that said that they were going to use the National Guard to round up undocumented immigrants. Now, this was an unsigned document. It did exist, and I grabbed this notification from the AP because I trust the AP, and I posted that the AP released this document that was unsigned, and then we got the fake news all over the website, and then SS, the VC Reporter, started talking to these people saying, why are you saying this is fake news? This document does exist. And they're like, oh, it's like VC reporter gods are talking to us. And they never expected the entity, not an individual, to respond. And then when we finally got them to calm down, there's this really strange sort of humanity that was laid bare in front of everybody, that you could see we weren't just VC reporter and they weren't just fake news people. We were two people that didn't understand each other. And then we finally came to a conclusion, which was really nice. So
I want to stay on this idea of fake news and reporting for a while. So how many of you are on Facebook? And you ever see that story that makes the rounds on Facebook? Denzel Washington wrote a check for $10 million to this veterans clinic in San Antonio. How come this was never reported in the media? Have you ever seen that one? Okay, I get this. This one shows up about every 6 months on my Facebook feed, usually posted by my sister, who never checks anything. And I keep sending her notes, say, Regina, Snopes.com. Okay, the reason that was never reported in the media is because it never happened. Okay, he did go to this clinic and made a donation later, but didn't whip out his checkbook on the spot. Darren, I'm sure it's happened to you. You answer the phone from some reader and says, how come you haven't reported X? There's stories out there you must go through and vet every day and decide, we're not publishing that because those are not truth. Can you share any of those?
I can't think of any instances right off the top of my head, but of course it happens all the time. You know, people call in and say, this happened, why didn't you report this? Yeah. And what I always tell them is, well, we haven't heard of that, we will look into it, and we do. You know, we'll direct our reporters, we will call the agencies or people that we think are involved and try to find out, you know, if what we're being told is actually true.
Yeah.
You know, there's a whole process to it before we can publish anything.
Yeah, you have to go through a fair amount of fact checking.
Right.
Before you get into
and we
that.
we're always try to be honest with people about that, you know, I understand what you're saying and I care about what you're saying, but we have to follow this process before we can publish anything about it.
Okay. Okay. Do you have anybody who goes to the paper on a daily basis and looks for examples of bias? How do you check yourself?
I mean, we get calls and letters pretty regularly from both sides, people saying, you know, you're too left or you're too right. Personally, I try not to look at it on a daily basis, but as a whole, you know, letters to the editor, the type of columns that we're running, the type of language that we're using, and sometimes it's not us and our local stories, it's, you know, people complain about the wire stories that we're using, so we look at the type of language that's being used in those stories, and is there some sort of bias that can be interpreted from the language that's using, and so it's kind of looking at it as a whole, and then making adjustments if we think they're necessary.
Okay. John, a lot of times in environmental reporting, people tend to look at it as a zero-sum game, you know? Either the environmentalists win or the business wins and that sort of thing. Do you focus in Condor Call on solutions and long-term resolutions?
Absolutely. I can give you some very good examples, too. For instance, outside of Ventura County, when the coal mines were closing down and coal miners were losing their jobs, the Sierra Club was there not only pushing retraining, but also to try to get more solar and everything, and to get jobs in there. And it's an underreported story. And so there's that factor that I personally, as an editor, am very issue-driven. Here's one thing that affects us all. You will find with the Sierra Club is very stringent on renewable energies, and this is what's happening. It's taken the long view, and that is it's opposing a lot of the oil, new oil drilling and everything in favor of renewables. Well, what's happening is it's a sea change on how we get our energies. I just listened to NPR on the way over here, and they said that China is now the major manufacturer of solar energy. And, you know, this it's very cultural driven. For instance, no matter what this administration does as far as allowing, for instance, they did an executive order about, forget about having gasoline engines meet a 50-mile-per-gallon thing by 2030. So why would you even do that? The fact is, it doesn't matter that they did that or not. the people have an incredible demand now for electric vehicles and hybrids. So it's almost as if the government is irrelevant in that thing. It's the same with solar. I have solar panels on my roof, and you know, the government didn't tell me to put it there or anything like that. So I think that's the answer.
Paul, is the breeze, are you going to get into some of the heavier issues in Ventura, water, things like that, development?
Well, I believe that we have covered water fairly extensively. You know, we're constantly out there looking for those kinds of stories, and we're a very small newspaper, and our resources are extremely limited. So much of the research that we have to do is handled by just a few people. Therefore, it gets difficult to get into the more complex and sophisticated issues like water in Ventura. However, we do pursue it as much as we possibly can.
So you said the key word, let's talk now about resources, okay? The numbers are pretty startling for those of you not familiar with it. In journalism, since about 2007, the number of journalism jobs in the U.S. has dropped from well north of 100,000 in the neighborhood of 160,000 to less than 100,000. It's just massive losses in the industry. Michael, what is the consequence of that for the people of America?
Quality and depth of where we can go with these stories, I think, and especially there's a few things. So when we're covering a county and there are 3 people in the editorial staff, that's it. So we get people who are very frustrated that they didn't get a story done, and I say, well, that's nice, and I'm sorry, but I have 3 people to do an entire county. We also have a limited budget. We also see it goes beyond just simply print not as read because of the internet. It also goes down to quality of life overall in Ventura County. When you look at this housing crisis and people are spending more money on their rent than people 10 years ago were paying in their mortgage, and they continue to pay that much, then they spend less out at the places that support the local papers. So you're seeing this, it's not that there's indifference to local news, that there's indifference to us wanting quality freelancers and quality journalists to be in our paper. It's simply the fact that I think some of the lawmakers aren't paying attention to what our community needs to grow and thrive. And it's also very sad to see upcoming interns, journalists coming to me and looking for jobs here, and there's really nothing to offer them here. So anyway.
Darren, you've had 3 owners in the last 5 years. You've had 3 owners in the last 5 years of the Star.
Yes, 3.
What's how's very difficult. What's happened to your resources over that 5 to 10 year period? And how are you dealing with that?
We don't have as many resources as we used to. I mean, just like most media organizations across the country. How we're dealing with it is we're sort of rethinking our strategy and focusing more on watchdog journalism, investigative journalism, and the type of journalism that we think is going to have a broad impact across all of Ventura County.
Okay. Sort of connect. I notice you're trying to do a lot of what I call connect the dots.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Connect the
not just
dots.
like Michael was saying. Go ahead.
Exactly, and it's not just like, oh, this is an issue that affects Ventura. It also might be affecting Moore Park and Simi Valley and Ojai, these kind of broader issues that really have a deep impact and affect a lot of people.
One of the stories I remember recently had to do with the traffic and how many more cars are on the road these days, and connected that to what you were talking about, Michael, the housing shortage. How these issues are all sort of organic in our community
and jobs as well.
And jobs as well, yeah. So you've I know from talking to you and others, you've outsourced certain parts of the newspaper to other parts, design work, copy editing work?
We do have, we do use design centers, and our design center is in Phoenix right now, and we do have designers there. So, but we do editing at the Ventura. I mean, we don't have a copy desk like we used to have, and that's actually how I started at the Star. Was as a copy editor. But we do have editors in our newsroom who are editing copy, and then our pages are designed in Phoenix.
Okay, interesting setup. Interesting. And okay, very good. Suze, do you have questions yet from the audience? Were you dropping them in the bowl? Let me go there. And I really appreciate the way you guys are answering these questions, kind of spot on. So, thank you for doing that.
Don't be afraid to ask a question.
Yeah, please, if you got a hand up.
Come in a little bowl and
While you're looking, I
Yeah.
have a question, maybe primarily for the Star, but I guess for everybody.
Hold on, we'll get a mic for you. You want a mic over there? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right, it works. Okay, my question is, and I come from the telecommunications industry, what we used to call the phone company. So I understand industries that have transitioned over time. But so my question is, from the print media, what's your perspective of your competitive advantage when it comes to the other forms of media? And how do you make the most of that competitive advantage compared to the instantaneous media, the online media,
Yeah.
TV, those kinds of things?
Great question. I wish I'd have thought of it. Thank you. That's a good one. Why don't we go down the row on that? Talk about your competitive advantages.
So we are a 7-day print publication, and I think, except for the LA Times, I believe we're the only print 7-day print publication in Ventura County. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. So that's certainly to our advantage, in that we're on people's doorsteps every day. In Ventura County? Yeah, am I wrong about that? Well, I think OHI has but a 7-day-a-week paper. Yeah.
But how about compared to the other forms of media that I can get, right now on my phone?
Well, what we try to give you is local coverage that maybe you can't get anywhere else. I mean, we can't compete, and we're not trying to compete with CNN or someone like that, because you can go to CNN and get that type of news. What you can't get every day that we can offer is local news every day on your phone and in print. Mm-hmm.
Jerry Seinfeld once said that, isn't it amazing that all the news in the world that happens daily fits in one newspaper? Well, that is no longer current. A couple years ago, the Condor Call decided to go all electronic. And it was a wonderful experiment because, with a nod to Jerry's thing, I am constrained by a certain amount of pages and all that, and it's extremely tough to fit everything I want to get in there. The electronic version was very good because I could just add a page or anything to expand it very well. The trouble is a lot of people weren't, of our 6,000 members, there was only a fraction that would actually open it up, even though the open rate was higher. And more generally, there's something like $60 billion worth of ad revenue on the internet, but most of it's taken up by the Facebooks and Google. The journalism aspect is not getting an awful lot of that ad revenue, and I know newspapers are very struggling. We have an online presence as well as a print. We put a print version online. This is going to be a struggle that's for newspapers because you usually just a certain amount of money and you get a newspaper every day or whenever. And now there's so much that's free on the internet, and particularly news outlets that take a compilation, something from the Post, something from another newspaper, LA Times and everything, and you can read all those things in one thing. And how they're getting their revenue is as you're reading the newspaper article online, all of a sudden a pop-up ad comes. It's very irritating. And it keeps me away from those kinds of sites sometimes, I mean, let me read the article. It's one thing to have an ad strip in the text online. That's fine because I can just skip over it. But when they start doing this pop-up ad that all of a sudden has a video and to it is just very annoying. So I'm not sure how the newspapers are going to handle that. Some of them, like the Times and the Santa Barbara News Press in particular, you can't get anything for free there if you go online. You might get the lead, 25 words, and then if you want to read the rest of the story, you have to pay money.
I got to interject with one story. So my wife, who is not a social media hound, but loves Instagram, is lately annoyed by the number of, ads she's getting on her Instagram feed, and was sort of griping about it one day. And why am I getting all these? And I finally looked at her and said, how much did you pay for your Instagram app? And when you've been married for 40 years, your wife can just look at you with a look that says, shut up and don't say another word. That's the look I got. But that's kind of where that's going, right? I don't pay anything, but they got to support it somehow, so I see these ads. I'll come back down, but Darren, do you have more viewers mobile than you do in print, or the same, or what's the number look like?
I think we still have more print, but our mobile audience is definitely growing, and we're putting more resources into mobile and to our desktop, vcstar.com. And when you're talking about competitive advantage, we're fortunate that we have some resources. We're able to do push alerts to mobile phones.
Yeah.
We've got training. Our reporters are trained in video, so we're really doing a lot more video these days, and we have resources like that we didn't have before, and that we can't do in print.
Yeah.
That sort of, allow us to offer more to our customers.
Okay. Well, coming on down the line.
Competing with electronic media is very, very difficult for print media. However, one advantage that we have is that we are strictly local. And, as well as our readership is primarily a senior readership. And seniors, still like to get the paper, and are less prone to looking and reading online. So that is certainly one of our advantages. And I think I've read recently that many local newspapers, very local, concentrating only on the city or the county or the city that they're in, excuse me, and they seem to be doing quite well, and their ad revenues are actually up. I think it's very difficult for my colleagues, to deal with the entire county because you need a lot of resources in order to be able to cover such a large area effectively. So we keep ourselves small, and we keep our area small, and we keep our editorials and and the stories that we do strictly about Ventura, and I think that works well for us. Now, that's not to say that we're ignoring electronic media. We certainly are not. We are online, and our readership online is growing and growing, and it's really convenient. And as a matter of fact, mostly when I read the newspaper, my newspaper, I read it online. It's just convenient. I'm used to it, and I think that's something that we all have been facing for a long, long time, and it's going to continue that way. And it's only going to get worse and worse. And it is a little frightening, with the way that media, especially large media, has merged and has been bought and sold. I mean, who would have thought the LA Times and Times Mirror Square would be up for sale? This is pretty much amazing. So our answer: stay local.
Okay. And Michael, your competitive advantage at the Reporter.
One, for print, I think is probably better for your eyes to look at a paper rather than staring at a screen staring at you and burning your retinas. Also,
Can we get a fact check on that?
But there is something to say about being constantly stuck in your phone all the time. And I can actually look at this audience right now and say that this is happening currently. and I think that...
Which means we're failing as a panel. Okay, we got to get more interesting.
I'm trying. The thing about there's an intimacy of, and I'm oddly probably in denial of the diminishing. I understand it, but I'm also have personally extreme internet fatigue, and social media fatigue, and I've pulled off a lot of that for now. And if I'm doing it, I certainly believe other people are doing that too, and they're looking for more tangible, real experiences. And being stuck on your phone isn't necessarily a real experience. This is a real experience here. What we're doing right now and talking and discussing and looking at each other and acknowledging each other's existence is really critical. And this paper has substance to it, not just mine, every single person who's here. And I understand the cost. I understand the print costs. We have shrunk this paper. There's all sorts of things to work around this print and try to keep it substantial. But there's also, in this paper, there's local ads. When you look at this paper, you're not seeing Pepsi and Marlboro. I don't even know if they advertise anymore. But my point is that you're looking at local businesses doing their best to survive. And so you look at local news, you look at local businesses, and this is really the only places, us here, are the only places you're going to see that. And I believe and have faith that that will continue on. And I think that there is truly, when you're competing with a million different websites online and you finally go, okay, I just want one thing to tell me what's going on here, or two or three, that maybe we will start to pull back from our internet consumption and have some faith in this print product. And even though I love trees and I'm a tree hugger from way back, I do believe that this is a valuable commodity, even if I wasn't in this industry. So.
Sam, can I add something to that?
Please, Darren,
Just kind
go
of
ahead.
playing off what you said. I think there's been a shift in media from before my time to now. It used to be very competitive among media organizations. You know, journalists were very competitive. Because of the way media has shifted, I think we're all so much more supportive of each other, regardless of which organization we work for. You know, I subscribe to several newspapers, not from a competitor's viewpoint to see what they're doing that we're not, although that's a little bit of it, but because I want to support journalism, you know,
Yeah,
all
and-
journalism.
And that certainly has risen the last 6 months or so. I wonder what caused that. Question from the audience. And Darren, this one's going to be for you, but a very pointed question, but maybe we can expand it a bit. When you published the article on Michael Babb, that was the Ventura superintendent, why were you not more diplomatic and say, quote, he has been released from his contract, instead of saying he was fired? That was a bit inflammatory.
So we said he was fired. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
You said he was fired.
We said he was fired.
And saying, instead of saying he's been
Oh.
released from his contract.
I guess I don't see that as inflammatory. I mean, he was let go by his organization. So yeah, I think that was in the headline, or maybe it was in the lead too. It was the headline.
That's
yeah.
interesting. So let's clear that up too. People don't know that. Do reporters write headlines?
We write the online headlines, and sometimes they get into print because of the way our paper is designed. It's in Phoenix. Sometimes they are rewritten at the Phoenix side, but we do have an editor who signs off on them at night for the print edition.
Okay. So to that point, why were you not more diplomatic to say he's been released from his contract?
I guess that's
So
the
let's
point
talk
of
about
view
that.
on
Yeah.
whether we were diplomatic or not.
Okay. Any other thoughts from you guys on that wording and when you're choosing words for headlines or people? Go ahead.
That's trying to get rid of that human bias. We see things the way we see it, and and we're just humans with heartbeats and sicknesses that we catch the flu from time to time. We're just people just like you, and we don't think about if someone doesn't have their job anymore because several people had decided to basically release him from his contract, i.e. shortened, fired. It's over. And I understand that it's an emotional topic because there's probably a lot of loyalty to certain people. They care about them. They want to see his future be well, but using the word fired for anybody is a sad thing to hear. As a matter of fact, it was interesting. There was a gentleman who was caught laundering money from a local nonprofit in Camarillo. And he went through the process, and they found him guilty. And then he called me and emailed, and he said, now that I've gone through this process and I was found guilty, can you go ahead and remove that story so I can find a job? And I'm like, I'm sorry. That's the fact. This is the fact, and you may not like the words that would describe the facts, but that's a fact, and semantics are important, but we can't necessarily sugarcoat everything in diplomacy for the sake of being overly sensitive to a person. The facts are the facts, and it's unfortunate. Just like I have a man's name, that's a fact, and it is what it is, and I feel bad that this has come up in this way, but it's not to hurt somebody. It's just stating it the way we see it, which is very frankly and abruptly.
Last summer, when that oil spilled out of the pipeline up in the barranca above the high school, I saw the press releases going out from the company, and they kept referring to the oil the incident as a release. And they were mad that Arlene kept reporting it and you kept reporting it as a spill. And I said, it's a spill. It ain't a release. You know? Release is what you do with fish, right? You release the fish. So the wording does get down to that. A couple questions here about the lack of coverage of senior issues, particularly in Oxnard and Ojai. How can this be changed? Or is there any chance for that to be changed?
We need to connect with you. People in my job we are in our 30s and 40s. We have.
You're not seniors.
A lot of us we connect with our parents, and not all our parents are struggling with the same issues. We connect with. I will talk to Suze a lot, and we don't always agree on what needs to be covered, and that's okay. But we need to. We can't read your mind. You have to come to us. That's what we always encourage. News tips. What is affecting you? What is affecting your community? And because it isn't necessarily, and I hate to say this, isn't necessarily affecting us personally, sometimes we overlook things that should be addressed. And we encourage that conversation for you to reach us.
You want to go at that, Darren?
Yeah, I would agree with Michael on that, when we're talking about resources, the community is a resource for us. You know, we need to hear from people. If there's a particular issue that needs attention, bring it to our attention, and we'll certainly look into it. Mm-hmm.
I also agree with Michael. It's amazing how many things do come through our offices every day: news releases, press releases, phone calls, et cetera, but we still need more because and of course our resources are limited, very limited, and to put someone in each one of those locations is very, very difficult. So we need you. Please call us, let us know, text us.
Do you make it easy for people to reach you? Ask that question honestly. Think about it from an outsider standpoint. Is it easy to access you, decision makers?
Yes.
How? I mean, how do I do it?
I have a ton of these for you.
Very good, Michael.
So this is my phone number at work. This is my email at work. You can find me on Facebook. You can contact us on our Facebook page. You can come to our office. You can. I've given away I've given away my phone number sometimes, and then I
regret it.
My personal text messaging can get a little crazy sometimes, but I do. If you're really concerned about something happening, we're easily accessible. I am easily accessible, and I always get back to you. But you have to understand that all of us here have the ability to discern what is going to be best for our paper. So there's people who might want you to talk about the pothole that no one will address, and this has been going on for a whole week. For 1 week, and I say, did you go to your city council? Well, no, I want you to do something. Well, you have to take some steps first, and then it can grow from there. If that's not being addressed, something happens to your car, something happens to multiple cars, then it becomes an issue. But first things first is some groundwork for yourself, and then we can start working toward a process of bringing it to light in the paper as well.
All right. Richard, you easy to access?
We
are extremely easy to access. I also have a slew of cards that I'm going to hand out as well, and we promote as much as we possibly can to anybody. Please contact us. Let us know. You can go online to our site. You can contact us from there. You can contact us at any of our phone numbers. I always return every phone call I get, and every text message, and every email. So please, we need you folks as as well as we think you need us.
All of that's true, the same with the Condor call, but I'm extremely proactive in reaching out to various organizations and all, because you have to do that. If you rely on people coming to you for the news, it's going to be fairly blank in a sense. So when I monitor a number of newspapers locally, particularly, and also websites, and I see a particular organization or something doing something, I call them up and I say, let's do something. I just recently did this with a painters organization, Southern California Artists Painting for the Environment. They've got hundreds of members. They're based in Santa Barbara, but they also drip into Ventura. And so I literally called them up and say, I want to know more of what you're doing, not only in Santa Barbara, but also Ventura, and please come and paint some of the beautiful landscapes that we have in Ventura. And so we make connections that way. So you really have to do an awful lot of outreach also.
So Darren, rather than just ask you the same question, give us an example of a story that you won't run. Somebody calls up and says, will you write a story about this? Not because it's lack of resources, but because,
Well, because it's not true.
Okay, good.
You know,
It's not true.
if we
Number
can't
one.
verify that it's true, we won't run it. If it affects just a small number of people, we may not go after that story.
Yeah.
And some of it does come down to resources.
Yeah.
Again, our strategy is really to go after stories that affect a wide audience. So, if that pothole on your street, we may not do a story about that particular
that particular
pothole.
one.
Yeah, because I have a pothole in front of my street, in front of my house, and so does everybody.
But I
so.
do remember one of the best things you had on the website a few years ago was take pictures of the worst potholes in the county. And I was checking that every day. Those were pretty bad ones. You also won't run stories sometimes when it's a for-profit organization and it looks like it's an ad, right?
Right.
Okay, can you expand that a little bit so folks would understand that better?
Yeah, I mean, if it's something that we don't feel has significant news value necessarily, and just
Okay.
comes across as more of an advertisement for a product, we generally shy away from stories like that.
This one from the audience for any of you. Which one of you is covering the, quote, peace movement, unquote, in Ventura County the best and the most? And if war is not the answer, then what is? I like that one. Peace movement issues. Go ahead. Oh, John, I thought you were leaning toward the mic. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I can't answer that. The publication that I'm working with now, the Condor Call, is not specifically reporting on peace versus war, but there's an amazing component to that, and that is war destroys the environment like you wouldn't believe, and people just pass it off because you're fighting whatever. It could be, I mean, the ravages that happened in Vietnam, I'm a veteran, by the way, and this was just so awful how they just carpet bombed a whole country, and the environment was awful. And you have to, that's usually not taken into account. But I think with the ethic of, when people have an ethic of protecting what we do have, the environment and everything, perhaps there's better ways of conducting wars. I particularly, I could get in trouble in this, but I think a lot of the ways that we're fighting ISIS now, and it was mostly engineered during the last 8 years, and that is using special forces and drones, and because they're targeted. It's not just let's just bomb everything, you know. But as far as reporting, it's a subtle thing. So we're not covering the peace movements particularly, but a lot of the stories that we have, like the rallies and everything, is also a justice for all and a peace movement.
Great, Michael. You look like you got some examples right here.
So while we are Ventura County centric, so if there was a group that came up that was talking about not going to war with North Korea, we would obviously do a story about them. But when we talk about peace, we're talking about, in my purview, my understanding of what peace is, it's the valuing of all individuals, of all humans, of our planet, because that is about humanity. When we care about our planet, we therefore care about each one of us and our suffering, and that we all boats rise. And so, for instance, this was our peace movement coverage for the Women's March. So that's the start, and this was absolutely incredible. This was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life, and I went down to LA to see that. This year, trying to humanize people who had lived in Ventura County without proper documentation. They shared their struggles and their stories, and I don't know if anybody read this one, but there was something very critical that happened in this story for me personally, which was one of the girls in here, one of the women, was very excited to participate, and she came into the office, and she was a little nervous, a little shy, and I thought, well, okay. And then I started asking her some questions, and I said, so you lived in Santa Paula during your time, and I don't know if I blew this thing out or not.
Keep going.
It's okay. So I asked her where she lives. She said Santa Paula. I said, okay, so your father a farm worker? And she said, yeah. And I said, did you have a crazy dog? And she said, yeah. And I said, holy shit. Excuse my language. But this woman, I had met her 9 years before, and I had lost touch with her, and she had finally gotten proper documentation, and she was so excited that she could use her real name for once. And it was, this is why I do this job, and sometimes it doesn't matter the news I'm trying to get out to other people when something that special occurs, and you see someone so happy to be an American, to be in this country, and to be herself. That was something I can never, you can't buy that, you can't. It was really a very moving experience, but to see her peace and excitement, that's the peace movement, to see someone who finally feels like she's valued here. This, of course, is our Earth Day issue. Talking about how we can preserve our planet, preserve things in our communities. And I'm very long-winded, and sorry about that, but peace is different in all sorts of ways, and I don't think that there's necessarily about anti-war, but it's factored. Peace is anti-war, but peace is also preservation of our planet, respecting humanity, respecting individuals, and understanding human suffering.
Go back. Pick up the bottom one. Did you? You said it was the most incredible thing you saw. You went down to LA for that. So which rally was that, Michael?
That was this was the Women's March.
Okay, very good. So here's a good question. I think it's a good question. I'm going to ask it. One of the first words I remember learning in journalism school was disinterested. That a journalist has to be disinterested. That doesn't mean uninterested. It means I don't have an interest either way. Would you feel funny about marching in a woman's march?
Absolutely.
You would?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I feel like as a journalist, I need to be separate from that. That
Okay.
participating in that march would make me an activist, and I would immediately sort of have a bias.
You feel differently? You, Michael?
Oh yeah, I totally feel differently. I believe
question.
100% that I am not going to go through my entire life and not feel anything. This was a call for all of us to be awake, and whether you respect this president or not, this march was critical not only to see as a journalist, but also to see millions of people show up and come out. And it was this rare thing that I don't think anybody will ever see again in this capacity unless something else very drastic happened. And to not feel anything, to not show up, and I was both covering it and also participating in it.
Okay, stop there. Stop there. How can you, with disinterest, cover something that you're participating in?
I can also show pictures from Trump's inauguration.
You didn't go.
I didn't go, but I couldn't afford to go. I did have family who did go to that.
Okay, because I think the point is that if we are to trust our media, we have to trust them to tell us, stories about the president or this administration from an unbiased viewpoint. That if we get involved in a particular story, or is that unbiasedness? Not even a word. Unbiased. Change it. I'm not trying to,
Oh no,
provoke
and I
you
don't.
here. I think it's a good discussion.
I think that for the 9 years and the 400 issues I've put out of this 450 or whatever of this paper, a lot of what's on this cover, these feature articles are about things that concern me in this community, and they are things that either I have personally experienced, or friends of mine, or people in this community have seen and experienced themselves. And because I feel some compassion for those serious issues, that I don't know how a person could possibly not report on things that they have an interest in. I don't understand how that.
Well, when Vince Scully did a Dodger game, I couldn't tell he was rooting for the Dodgers. Okay, I'm not going to pick on you anymore. John, yeah, please.
On both sides.
Please.
On that. In my 40 years as a journalist, I never participated in anything like that. I covered them. I did not participate in them. And now that I do not have those constraints any longer, I can now work for a publication and be more of an advocate. And unapologetically. But even still, there's something that I hope journalists are still being trained in, is that there are at least two sides to every darn story. I covered extensively the oil development off and onshore in Santa Barbara during the 70s and 80s. And I never wrote an article just having one side of it. I got to know the oil people and the environmental people, and one of the things I was most proud of is that the Oil and Gas Journal, which is the Bible of the industry, asked one of the oil people if there was a journalist who could be unbiased and cover the oil development in Santa Barbara counties. And they he gave them my name. Okay. And so I was a stringer for them. At the same time that I'd write an article for Oil and Gas Journal, I would also write another article for the Sierra Club or some other organization. But and it was basically the same story, given all the potential sides. And so I've been doing both, and now I can be a little bit more of an advocate.
Okay, good. Richard, you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I agree with Darren completely. I've covered a lot of marches, and I would never take anybody's side. I think that even if you are on a particular side, and most of us are at times, but we have to leave that at home when we're out there covering a story, and we must take it from an empirical point of view, and we can't take sides, or we are not credible, period.
Go ahead.
I just want to clarify, we're only talking about this march. This is one thing in 36 years that I've been alive that I could not be a part of. It was something very important to me.
Fair enough. Fair enough. It's not, I just think it's an interesting approach in journalism, and I wonder how clear the line is going to be going forward. For one thing, I think that for many years, journalists were involved in a lot of nonprofit groups in the community. A lot of people in the room will remember Julius Gaius. And Julius, who was one of my predecessors and Darren's predecessors at the Star, was involved in many, many nonprofit groups and organizations throughout Ventura County, right? Rotarian, involved in the start of the United Way, the hospital's expansion, things of those nature. Does that go on as much? I know David Comden, your publisher, is real involved in the Ventura Hillsides Conservancy.
He was, and he's not any longer. He's back and forth, and now he's on the board over at. He's at the board on downtown, and it's interesting that it's coming down to bias and trying to get rid of this inherent passion that we feel as human beings. And I remember one time I had a reporter covering there's children had been murdered, and there was a story about that, and he had to deal with these parents, and I asked, he wrote this really long story, and it was very moving to me, and I asked him, I said, how hard was that to write? He's like, no big deal. It was just something I had to do. And I thought, wow, that's the difference between you and me. Some journalists can do that and some cannot. And I am one of those people who do feel deeply for all sorts of things.
Darren, you're going to address this?
Yeah, I think it still goes on. We encourage our journalists and our staff to be members of the community. I mean, we live here too, and to participate in communities and to be involved in organizations that they care about. But we need to make sure that I know which organizations they might be volunteering with, or they might be spending their money on, donating to make sure that they're not writing and covering those organizations. So there's a clear line between their role as a community member with an organization and their role as a journalist.
A funny story for an aside on that. So I'm on the board of the Ventura County Community Foundation, which has been in the news a lot lately, not for all the best reasons. And Kathleen Wilson of the Star has been covering that quite a bit. One of my board members is very rabidly opposed to President Trump. And she wants the press to tear the president backside apart every day, right? But when Kathleen wrote a pretty tough story about the Community Foundation, she said to me, why didn't you just follow the press release? I had to explain to her the difference, on this out there. Okay, I like this idea of bias. Let me stick with this for a minute. You have a lot of reporters who have Twitter accounts. They do live tweeting from meetings and such. What are the guidelines for them doing those commentaries, if you will, during meetings?
For me as a manager, they're a reporter first, and especially when they're doing meetings, and I don't think we've had many issues or any issues. They're there as a journalist, and their Twitter account is just a way of reporting the news, just as they would be writing a story in the paper. I know some journalists, I think the line is getting a little fuzzy there. They'll put a line in their Twitter profile that says, the opinions here are my own.
Yeah.
I'm on the side of my Twitter account is a representation of me as a journalist, so I try to keep my opinions out of it.
All you ever tweet about is Kansas basketball.
That's true. So I do have a little bit of bias in my Twitter account. You're right.
You can't cover the Jayhawks. I think one of the ways, if you're not doing this, we were talking about coverage earlier. Arlene Martinez, who covers the city of Ventura. I sort of follow her on my phone on Monday nights so I can see what's going on in the council meetings. And Wendy, who covers Oxnard Council, so sort of miss it when some of the reporters are covering council meetings, but they're not active on Twitter. So I got to wait a day or so to find out what happened at that meeting. So, any trouble with bias, Richard, in the breeze?
I think not. You know,
Yeah.
most of our writers are, as a matter of fact, seniors and have developed, you know, some kind of maturity about this. And I think they do, you know, tend to be as empirical as they possibly can be and as unbiased as they can. At least I know I do. And I think that is absolutely the only way for journalists to be.
Okay.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah, sure, Michael.
So, as an editor, I'm an editor, and I write editorials, which are full of opinions.
Good, yeah.
And I do some news, which would be a lot of Q&As, and I ask them questions. There's two things I wanted to bring up. There's so many different ways of looking at something. And I was at work around 5 o'clock on a Friday, and a man had gotten hit in a crosswalk. And there's a bunch of people standing around talking about what happened. And so there's three things that were obvious. One was the man was looking down at his phone and should have been paying attention to the fact this car was coming. The other one was the man was in the car and must have been paying attention to his phone and not the person in the crosswalk. The third one was, this is not the first time this has happened. There should be a stop sign here at this crosswalk because this continues to happen. Now, as I was walking by, there was a man standing on the corner with his dog far from everybody else. And he said to me, or said under his breath, and I heard it, "I can't believe those guys get paid overtime for that." And I thought, wow, that is something I would have never have looked at all. And to him, for me not reporting that overtime, that's a bias. So in this way of being completely neutral as a human being with a heartbeat, it's just really hard to do. And also, as a community weekly, or as an alternative weekly, I bought a gun last year, and it was after San Bernardino, and I wrote about it. And I wrote, because I hate guns. I've been held up with a sawed-off shotgun in my head before, many years ago, and it was a very terrifying experience to me. But I needed to understand why this was happening, why people felt the gun would make them safer. And so I went down that journey myself, and we published it. That was a biased article because I was scared of guns, and that was my personal opinion on that. So as far as what we do, VC Reporter, news is news, features are different, reviews are different. So you have to look at what the news is and call it that. You have to look at the editorial and call it an opinion. You have to look at a feature and say, what am I getting myself into in the feature? And usually it's a lot of news features, but some of it will be different ways of looking at things.
Well, I'll offer one data point in defense of these folks. It's happened to me, and now I've seen it on a national level. When I first came to the Star, there was a publisher, and he was very had conservative viewpoints politically, and he worried that our newspaper was too liberal. And we would do fairly extensive marketing surveys of Ventura County. And I said, just one time, let me work with the survey company because I want to try to find an answer to something. And early on in the survey, when you were asking about the newspaper, we'd ask, is the Ventura County Star liberal, moderate, or conservative? And then later on at the end, when you ask the data points about, are you male or female? Well, obviously you know that. Age, income level, all that sort of thing. We asked, do you consider yourself liberal, moderate, or conservative? And the ratio was exactly what I thought it would be, 1-to-1. Everybody who identified themselves as a liberal thought the newspaper was too conservative, and vice versa. And everybody who thought the paper was identified themselves as moderate thought the paper was a moderate. And I've seen this repeated again and again and again in national surveys. Now, it may not be quite as true today. I think the Trump effect has really hardened sides, but I suspect there's still a lot of truth in that it comes from your perspective, whether there's bias or not. Okay. All right, let me give you guys one chance to wrap up, and we'll just go right down the aisle. Michael, what didn't you say that you want to say?
Two things regarding what we cover and what you can expect to see. As a weekly, what I think is most important is that people show up to something, not necessarily what happened at something. So because we're a weekly and we cover a county, to do both it's just redundant to have it in 1 week and then the next week. And the reason that it's more important to have people show up is because that experience is more important to be there than to just read about what it was like there, and also just to get that journalist take on what had happened. So understand too, also we talked about yearly event coverage. I remember years ago, there was an event that had just come back to town. And we put it on the cover, and then the next year, I'm like, I can't put it back on the cover. It's a great event, but we're not going to put it on the cover. And one guy said to me, you got nothing else better going on that week? And I said, okay. Well, thank you very much for your information on this, your perspective, but just understand there's limitations, and there's also my understanding of the way we consume information is when we start recognizing redundancies, we ignore them. And so when you see that in a newspaper, even if it's a year later, let's say it's 3 years, 4 years, then we're starting to pile on this redundancy, and then we become irrelevant. And that is not something we want. I don't think anybody wants that. So please do understand that about when you're seeking story ideas, stories that go in there. Give us a couple of weeks. If you have a cool event coming up that we have not covered the year before, I will do my best to get it in. And if not, we will do definitely calendar listing, if not a pick to get more people to your event. Again, is the experience for the public to have. And also, this woman over here talked about Latino, representing the Latino community. And when I was searching for immigrants to Ventura County, I reached out to several different people who had become entrepreneurs and done really well, and they were new to the county, as in this is not their native born here. And I talked to one guy at a radio station. He said the only thing that the VC Reporter was good for was calendar listings and after dark. And I thought, well, that's discouraging because we work hard to try to get news to people to read. Then I posted on Facebook, and it started to ask people questions, and some of my Latino friends weighed in. Well, you need to have us more in the paper. And I said, when was the last time you read the paper? He said, I don't know. So my frustration lies this. It's not necessarily that you may not be represented, seniors represented on the cover, that Latinos are not represented on the cover, that we have this kind of shallow way of looking at things, but you do have to open the cover and see what's inside to see if you really feel that you're not being represented in this, and understanding our parameters now of what we can cover and what we like to cover.
Fair enough. Richard?
Well, we still, and what I would like to say simply is that we will remain the local newspaper in Ventura. And I think we do a very good job of covering Ventura events, and I think we do a great job covering seniors. And we even have a pull-out section every Wednesday. And we have solicited, and we are well represented in advertising from all types of senior services and housing and virtually everything else. So we will continue to do that, and we will continue to maintain our space as the local Ventura newspaper.
Okay, thank you, Richard. John?
Embrace the technology. You are living in a time of not only confusing but also amazing information technology. I just give you an example. Having started as a reporter in the 60s, if I wanted to get the background on something, I would have to go to the library. Spent many, many years doing all that manual stuff, and now all I have to do is click on a link. As far as newspapers go, one of the things that I try to meld them is, for instance, I did a story on locals join the resistance, which was the Women's March and all that. And as I go along in the article, it says something about the cuts in the EPA. I have included a link on where you could go. Don't take my word for it. Go to the link, and it'll show you the cuts in the EPA. Yeah. And various things like that. It's just amazing. I'll be writing a story and say, now, when the heck did that oil spill happen in Santa Barbara? I know it was '69, but what was the date? I can find out in 5 seconds.
Right.
This is amazing. I understand seniors have a lot of problem with it. There's nothing more pleasurable than to open up a newspaper in the morning with your cup of coffee and read the news. I have done it all my life, and I still do it. I used to read 12 to 15 newspapers when I ran my clipping service and my news service. And now it's really hard to get that same blast online. There's that tactile feeling of a newspaper and everything, but really, you have to adapt and you have to change to this. Like when you're reading a book, for instance, on the Kindle, and there's a word that you don't know, you just press your finger on that and the definition's going to come up. I mean, this is amazing stuff. You have the whole world literally at your fingertips. And I think more seniors should try to segue to embrace this new technology.
Very good.
And VACE has classes for that, by the way.
Sure. All right, Darren?
What did you tell our Twitter-in-chief that idea?
We've
He
managed
is
to
not,
avoid that
I'm
for
sorry,
2
but
hours.
he is not intellectually curious.
Let's let it go. Let it go.
Yeah,
Darren,
exactly.
finish up.
First of all, I just want to thank you for having me here today. Thank you for the council for having me here. I am new to this role in the Star, although I've been at the Star for a long time, so it's really exciting for me to get out into the community. I've sort of been hiding in an office for the past several years, so it's really a pleasure to be here. I guess what I just want to get across is that these are challenging times for news organizations. We have a room full of really talented journalists who I am so proud of. And we live in this community, we love this community, and that's why we do what we do, and we're really here to serve you. So I hope that part comes across.
Very good. And just let me throw out in closing, I was checking with Suze. So what's on this logo here is 2 trees, right? And what happened to 2 trees this week?
Now it's
right?
3 trees.
It's change, okay? And to John's point, so much in our community is changing, including institutions, not just newspapers. I mean, look at how banks used to dominate the community and how things have changed in that arena too. So it's up to us, like John says, embrace this, take it and do our best to stay with it and make it work for us. And remember the words of Thomas Jefferson, who said that were it left to me to decide whether we should have government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I would not hesitate to prefer the latter. So keep that in mind as we go out there. No offense, Cheryl. Suze, thank you.
I want to thank everyone who attended today. I want to thank our panel. Thank you for being here. All of you in this room contributed to today as well. Thank you, Tim. You were fabulous. You always are. But continue to come to our meetings. We meet once a month. We do issues. We're not planting gardens, although we could do that too, but we focus on issues, primarily transportation, issues that are important to you, issues that you care about, issues that we can collectively put our heads together and try to figure out solutions, as all of you do. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Cheryl, for being here and representing the city. And thank you all, and my team also, for being here. And I'm sorry our principal wasn't here. She had a medical emergency. And that's Carolyn Bang Walker, who makes us all work better together.